Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Deep Blue Sea, the podcast, the only show that devours the 1999 Rennie Harlin masterpiece, one deep blue scene at a time. I am one of your hosts, Jay Cluett.
And I am Mark Hoffmeyer.
And this week we are talking about episode 6, chapter 6, Feeding Time. And we have not one, not three, but two guests for you this week to talk about Feeding Time. First up is my co-host from the Lambcast, Richard Kirkham.
Hey, glad to be here. At least I'm not pissing in the wind.
Indeed. Yes, welcome, Richard. And we also have Richard's daughter from Hollywood Consumer. It's Amanda Kirkham.
Hello.
Hi, Amanda. Welcome to the show. So before we dig into this scene in which we have a kind of a bro-off between Russell and Carter, we complete the Aquatia crew, we meet Preacher and the Bird, and then we have our first death of the film with a shark meets an untimely end. Let's meet the guests a little bit. So, Amanda, what's your history with Deep Blue Sea?
Oh, my history with Deep Blue Sea. Well, I have been a fan of shark movies since I was very, very little.
Why is that? What happened to you?
Jaws is my favorite movie. I saw it when I was 4 years old. Through a mix-up, actually saw the whole thing when I was 4 after my parents had showed it to us, editing it for our young eyes and ears. My grandmother decided to show us a movie and didn't realize that that's what they had done, so... Yeah, it's been my favorite movie since I was 4, and ever since then I've always really loved shark movies and big Shark Week fan. So when Deep Blue Sea came out, I remember going and seeing it in theaters because I definitely remember being in the theater when the big jump happens and everybody coming out of their seat and screaming, and it's one of the things that I'm missing right now is going to the movies and experiencing things like that with an audience. But yeah, I've loved it since it came out. And actually a couple years ago, I did a series of videos on my YouTube channel anticipating Shark Week. And I think I did a countdown of my 6 favorite shark movies, and I did a review of each one, and Deep Blue Sea was one of the ones that I reviewed. So that's kind of my history with the movie.
So was it 1 or 2?
It was actually... I think it was number 4.
That's awkward.
I mean, that's fair. There's Jaws out there. There's The Shallows, The Reef, Open Water, Bait, Jaws Revenge. I mean, that's number 1. That banana boat scene destroyed me as a child. So I'm just going to leave that out there. I've never looked at banana boats or bananas the same way. Ever. Killed me.
Wonderful. Okay, and Richard, did you have a kind of reversal here where you introduced Amanda to Jaws? Did she introduce you to Deep Blue Sea? That kind of thing?
Well, I'm afraid I'm the one who took her. And I remember going to the movie. We had just gotten back from a trip around the country. We'd rented a van. We did 33 states and 2 countries because we had dinner in Canada one night. And we'd been on the road for a month when we got home. And this was the first movie that we saw when we got home. It might very well have been the very next day. And we were all a little wound up from the trip, wound down and tired, but anxious to see something in a theater. And Deep Blue Sea is the one that we saw. I think it was also the first time that we'd been in the stadium seating in the theater that we usually went to. I think they'd renovated in the month that we'd been gone. They'd put in stadium seating. So that's my memory. And I've seen it maybe 3 or 4 times since then and enjoyed it very much ever since. It's a great shark movie.
You know what I love is whenever I talk to people about their theatrical experience of watching Deep Blue Sea, they always bring up the Sam Jackson death, the ending scenes, the crowd participation, how much everyone just had fun with it. Was that your experience when you watched it? Like you said that people cheered. Do you remember that? People just got because I was working in a theater and I would sneak in and just listen to people go crazy over it. I loved it.
Yeah, I don't know so much cheering, but laughter and sort of a wow kind of thing when Samuel Jackson makes his exit from the film. Everybody is just surprised and enjoying watching it at that moment. I think there were a few people who cheered, but that's mostly because they liked being surprised, and I thought that was a great surprise. And people did jump, although not as much as they did at Jaws.
That scene is like 12 weeks away. I always remember it being a lot earlier in the film, but we'll get there. That's going to be a good show. Good. Well, speaking of the film, this week.
Can I ask everyone a question real quick?
Yes. I was surprised that you didn't interrupt me early on with some random non sequitur.
I always wait till you get into the middle of a sentence. When there's a blank space, I don't do it. I don't wait to jump in. I wait for someone to talk to interrupt them. But there's a scene in this during feeding time where Sherman Preacher Dudley is in his kitchen. Wonderful production design, by the way. Love it. But after he feeds his parrot, they go to the scene where they're about to feed the sharks, and he says feeding time. And they do a nice transition through the porthole into the water.
It's such a great transition. It's a beautiful transition. I love it.
Beautiful. Did anybody here notice that there was a lamb and a fish right in front of that porthole? And he's a preacher.
Oh, yeah.
I noticed the lamb. I didn't notice the fish, but I did notice the lamb.
Oh, yeah, I see it now. Yeah, it's like a little metal lamb and kind of a bit of slate or something that's cut rough. It's kind of in the shape of a fish. It's a abstract fish.
I think that's pretty fitting for a preacher. So the production design on this I loved. Like I loved how organized Carter's wrenches were in this scene. I loved how the KitchenAids were set up. I've done a lot of work in kitchens through events. And so seeing the setup of everything and the ovens and everything, the glass jars, the plastic things in the kitchen, it's good production design on this scene. Did y'all pick up on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of dishes in that sink, and I thought, does he have to do the dishes himself? It seemed like he's got to do the cooking and the cleaning. And where's everybody else here?
It's a giant kitchen. We learned a couple of weeks ago that they're on a skeleton crew for the weekend. So it's a very big kitchen. We kind of have to assume that maybe he has some help regularly, but down to the kind of minimal crew that they have, which you couldn't tell it was a small crew by the size of the cake he's making. The biggest cake it's a wedding cake, basically.
And the porthole over the sink. I mean, I guess if you're going to have a window, you ought to have it over the sink because, what else are you going to do when you're washing dishes?
Yeah, exactly.
That seems a little odd, but that's okay.
Think of your kitchen layout. Mine might have a kitchen sink. I look out and I've got a window right in front of the sink. So it's a standard kitchen. It just happens to be underwater.
Sharks never swim by the window there in Bournemouth, do they?
I mean, maybe do you think the sharks sat outside watching him cook and just learned? So when they escaped, they could know how to fillet something?
Well, at least one of them is got an eye on that bird.
Here's how you turn on the oven.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I learned how to turn on the oven.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of them's watching that and watching the bird, thinking, I'm gonna eat that bird. It's the last thing I'm gonna do. I'm gonna eat that bird.
I'm tired of his talking. Whoa.
It is a mouthy bird.
And they couldn't get a Hollywood bird. Did you know? They couldn't find one. They couldn't afford one. So
they're on a budget.
So with this on film sets. Like I've worked on some where if you bring a horse, you got to have a handler, and then you have the owner. So they couldn't bring in a Hollywood bird, so they got a Mexican parrot. But they said it was great, and Sam Jackson loved how expressive it was. I'd say it's the best animal actor since the dog in Gremlins.
Yeah, I don't know. There are a lot of animal actors that I'd give great credit to. I'm not sure the parrot in Deep Blue Sea is the one I would think of first, but he had a good vocabulary for a parrot.
It's his chemistry with Sherman Preacher Dudley was off the charts. They look like buds. They look like frenemies.
I'd be friends with anybody giving me that much frosting.
I looked into this bird. It's a blue-fronted Amazon parrot. And they are known for being lifelong friends. They're good for people who are like single, who are on their own, and they will like attach, and they can live 40 or more years, and they form like really good bonds if you spend the time with them. So this is like the dog of parrots with a like quadruple lifespan kind of thing. So when later in the film, when the parrot eats it, or the shark eats the parrot, so that's a lot of years together that Bird and Sherman are missing out on. It truly is his best friend.
Wow. I cried a little bit. Every time I see the bird die, I cry. But now I'm just going to bawl.
I mean, I sense you're joking, but there are parrot forums where they all talk about crying when this parrot died and being in like a state of depression after seeing the bird die. and how they want to have a film where a giant parrot eats some sharks for revenge. And I'm here for that film.
Wow. You know when Dawson cried, that gif of James Vanderbeek crying in Dawson's Creek? That's me during this scene. Just ugly crying for the parrot.
And if anyone is concerned that parrots shouldn't eat cake frosting, it's okay. They can. They're okay for high sugar things.
I thought about looking that up, but I thought, no, those guys are obsessive enough. They're going to take care of it.
Yeah, so the first note I wrote down was, can parrots eat frosting? And they can eat things that are high in sugar. It's okay. And it's in a future scene, we see the cake again, and the food coloring, the frosting is blue. So this is the bit he's feeding him is pre-coloring, which is probably better. Especially
less
blue.
Carcinogenic for the bird.
Yes, exactly.
Oh my gosh.
I like the directions we take.
This is wonderful. So he knows this bird. I mean, this bird enjoys a little bit of it. He knows it's healthy for him. He's a good owner. And the bird leaves him later on during the slip and slide scene.
I mean, he's a good owner, but he's also keeping a parrot underwater, which I couldn't find any data on whether that's good for the parrot or not, but I'm going to guess it's not what they were designed for. It's not where it should be.
I'm sure PETA would not approve.
Well, especially because he keeps it in a kitchen, and there's one place you don't keep a bird.
And he does threaten to turn it into tiny little drumsticks.
Yeah. There's one place you don't want to keep a bird, it's a kitchen. Because the Food Safety Magazine website has various things to say about keeping birds in kitchens, and they're all, don't do it. They can harbour over 40 types of parasites, 60 types of infectious diseases, mainly going to spread them through their droppings, which they can do anywhere, anytime. So, this shouldn't be happening.
Maybe the parrot is kitchen trained.
Do you think if he needs a teaspoon, he just says, parrot, teaspoon, and the little guy goes and gets it for him?
See, this is why they should have had a bigger budget to have a parrot that could do that, because that sounds great. I want a parrot flying around with a whisk.
Now they'd do a CGI parrot.
Ugh, and it would be so much worse.
Measuring cup.
Which size?
Okay, dickhead.
Dear me. What brand?
Yeah, what brand?
I reckon that parrot could probably open a can of beer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Or a bottle, actually. That's a formidable beak on it.
Well, when he reaches up with those fingers to give it the frosting, I'm thinking, a parrot can take your finger off with those beaks. That just didn't seem like the smart thing to do.
That'd be bad for a chef.
Absolutely, yes. That's one thing you need as a chef is your fingers.
I don't know. I just love the production design. And then starting off between the scene with Sam Jackson and Thomas Jane Russell Franklin and Carter Blake, were you a little disappointed when Sam Jackson or Russell Franklin goes, hey, what does a shark wrangler do? And then Carter Blake goes, well, it's kind of, it's basically exactly that. Like, I would love more in-depth knowledge into how, okay, yes, a shark wrangler wrangles sharks.
How do you get that job?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the one I wonder. Apparently being a smuggler is a prerequisite, but I'm not exactly sure how you got from smuggler to shark wrangler. And is it one of those skills that they teach in prison when you're looking for one of those, training classes, vocational classes?
Well, I can tell you, I did look up how to become a shark wrangler. This isn't a career path I intend to pursue. I'm in my early 30s, and I think that time has passed. But you basically need to have there are three requirements to become a shark wrangler. Unsurprisingly, it's a dangerous job. LeisurePro.com told me about how to become a shark wrangler. You need to be first off, certified scuba diver. Makes sense. You need to be able to dive, and you need to do a lot of training, which takes time, patience, and dedication. So we know that Carter, he's methodical, he's patient, he's dedicated to his cause. And you need to get the equivalent of a master's degree in sharks. Now, in a previous episode that's not released yet, Mark and I were discussing whose fault this all is. Like, everything that happens later in the film. And I think this is pretty definitive that it's Carter's fault at this point. Because he's supposed to have this master's degree equivalent in sharks. But he doesn't know that the shark is faking it when it's pretending to be sedated later on. He should know how high sharks can jump out of the water. That's not covered in the film. But we know, Mark and I know that the fences are not high enough. Mako sharks can jump over those fences right now. Not even flooding the facility. So everything that goes wrong, I'm now blaming it on Carter from this point on.
Well, she hired him on the cheap, right? So he had gone to Leavenworth, which is a military prison. So maybe he was like a frogman before then, but then he got out, and she needed someone who wouldn't ask questions because she's Frankensteining sharks. So this guy McBride, what's his name? He's on the Sharkmen show.